The Dark Rise of the Viking Age. Chapter 1. The North, where legends were born. Far to the north of Europe, beyond thick forests and icy seas, lived a people who would one day terrify half the world. They were sailors, they were warriors, and they were explorers. History remembers them as the Vikings. But before they became legendary raiders, they were simply farmers and fishermen living in harsh lands. The lands of Norway, Denmark, and Sweden were beautiful but unforgiving. Winters were long and dark. Crops were difficult to grow. Food was often scarce. Life was a constant struggle against nature. Because survival was so difficult, the people of the North became strong, resilient, and fearless. They learned to fight early in life. A boy growing up in a Viking village would spend his childhood watching warriors train with swords, axes, and shields. By the time he became a man, battle was already part of his world. But the Vikings were not only warriors, they were also master shipbuilders, and their ships would change history. Chapter 2. The Ships That Conquered the Seas. The Vikings built some of the most advanced ships of the ancient world. These ships were called longships. They were fast, flexible, and incredibly strong. Their shallow design allowed them to sail in deep oceans, but also travel up narrow rivers. This meant Viking warriors could attack places no enemy expected: villages, cities, and even entire kingdoms. A Viking longship could carry dozens of warriors across stormy seas. Its dragon-shaped prow struck fear into those who saw it approaching. And when those ships appeared on the horizon, panic followed, because everyone knew what was coming. Chapter 3. The Raid That Shocked Europe. The year was 793 AD. On the quiet coast of northern England stood a peaceful monastery called Lindisfarne. The monks living there spent their days praying, writing manuscripts, and caring for the sick. They had no walls. They had no soldiers. They believed they were safe. One morning, strange ships appeared on the sea. Long, narrow ships with carved dragon heads. Warriors jumped onto the shore. They carried axes, swords, and shields. The monks had never seen anything like them before. Within minutes, chaos erupted. The Vikings stormed the monastery. Treasures made of gold and silver were taken. Buildings were burned. Many monks were killed. Others were taken as slaves. When the raiders finally left, Lindisfarne lay in ruins. Across Europe, people were horrified. Some believed the attack was a punishment from God. Others believed the world was entering a time of darkness. But for the Vikings, this was only the beginning. Chapter 4. Warriors of the North. The Vikings quickly gained a reputation for their terrifying fighting style. Unlike many armies of the time, Viking warriors were fast and aggressive. They attacked suddenly and disappeared just as quickly. Their weapons were simple but deadly: axes, swords, spears, shields. Some warriors became legendary. Among them were the berserkers. These warriors were said to fight in a state of uncontrollable fury. Before battle, they would shout, bite their shields, and enter a trance-like rage. Some stories claimed they felt no pain in battle. They charged into enemies like wild beasts. Historians still debate how much of these stories are true. But one thing is certain: when Viking warriors attacked, many enemies fled in fear. Chapter 5. The Vikings Who Explored the World. While many Vikings became famous for raiding, others became explorers. They sailed farther than almost any sailors of their time. Vikings reached Iceland, Greenland, Russia, Constantinople, and around the year 1000 AD, a Viking explorer named Leif Erikson sailed even farther west. He reached a land across the Atlantic Ocean, a land full of forests and wild grapes. Today we know this place as North America. This means the Vikings reached America nearly 500 years before Columbus. Their journeys proved that the Vikings were not just warriors, they were also some of the greatest explorers in human history. Chapter 6. The Beginning of Viking Kingdoms. Over time, Viking raids became larger and more organized. Instead of simply attacking and leaving, many Vikings began settling in the lands they conquered. They created powerful kingdoms. One of the most famous Viking leaders was Ragnar Lothbrok. According to legend, Ragnar led many raids against England and France. His sons would later become some of the most powerful Viking warlords in history. Together, they would form an army so massive that it terrified entire kingdoms. This army became known as the Great Heathen Army. And soon, Europe would face one of the most dangerous invasions in its history. Chapter 7. The Legend of Ragnar Lothbrok. Among all Viking warriors, one name became legendary: Ragnar Lothbrok. Some historians believe he was a real person. Others believe he may be a combination of several Viking leaders whose stories merged into one legend. But in Viking tales, Ragnar was one of the greatest warriors who ever lived. He was said to be fearless in battle and clever in strategy. Ragnar led many raids across Europe, attacking powerful kingdoms that had never faced enemies like the Vikings before. One of his most famous raids was against the powerful city of Paris. In the year 845, Ragnar sailed up the Seine River with a fleet of longships. The Frankish kingdom was unprepared. The Vikings attacked quickly and violently. The Frankish king, Charles the Bald, had no choice but to pay a massive ransom of silver to make Ragnar leave. This was one of the first times a European king had paid Vikings to stop attacking. But Ragnar's story did not end in victory. According to legend, he was eventually captured by the king of Northumbria in England. The king ordered Ragnar to be thrown into a pit filled with venomous snakes. As he died, Ragnar reportedly laughed and said that his sons would avenge him. And they did. Chapter 8. The Great Heathen Army. After Ragnar's death, his sons gathered a massive Viking force. Among them were famous warriors: Ivar the Boneless, Bjorn Ironside, Ubba, Sigurd Snake in the Eye. Together they formed the Great Heathen Army. In 865 AD, this enormous Viking army landed in England. Unlike earlier raids, this was not a quick attack. The Vikings came to conquer. City after city fell. Kingdom after kingdom collapsed. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were unprepared for such a massive invasion. Only one kingdom remained strong enough to resist: the Kingdom of Wessex. And its king would become one of the most important leaders in English history. Chapter 9. Alfred the Great. The King of Wessex was Alfred the Great. At first, Alfred struggled against the Viking armies. They were experienced warriors and brilliant raiders. Several times Alfred was forced to retreat and regroup. But Alfred was patient. He reorganized his army. He built strong defensive fortresses across his kingdom, and he trained his soldiers carefully. Finally, in 878 AD, Alfred confronted the Viking leader Guthrum at the Battle of Edington. The battle was brutal, but Alfred's army held its ground. In the end, the Vikings were defeated. Guthrum surrendered and eventually agreed to convert to Christianity. The victory saved Wessex, and it prevented England from becoming entirely Viking territory. But the Viking Age was far from ending. Chapter 10. The Viking Empire. By the late 9th century, Viking power had grown enormously. Vikings ruled large areas of England, Ireland, Scotland, Normandy in France, and parts of Eastern Europe. One of the most powerful Viking kings was Canute the Great. In 1016, Canute conquered England and became its king. His empire eventually included England, Denmark, Norway. For a time, the North Sea became a Viking-controlled empire. But power rarely lasts forever. Soon, new forces would begin to weaken the Viking world. Chapter 11. The Changing World. Several factors slowly ended the Viking Age. First, many Vikings settled permanently in the lands they had conquered. Instead of raiding, they became farmers, merchants, and rulers. Second, Christianity spread throughout Scandinavia. As Viking leaders converted to Christianity, their culture slowly changed. Raiding monasteries in Christian towns became less common. Finally, European kingdoms became stronger. They built stronger defenses and stronger armies. Knights in heavy armor began to dominate the battlefield. Viking warriors, who had once terrified Europe, now faced stronger resistance. Many Viking leaders realized that constant raiding was